How's it going, everybody? It's Sam here, and welcome back to the Morbid Veil. I'd like to apologize for my absence over the last month, as some unexpected family situations came up. But now I'm back, and we're ready to finish off this year with more character builds. Until you take off to see that cutie of yours. It's only 2 weeks, Jay. And it's Christmas. I mean, wouldn't you travel to go see Harley?
Why would I want to do that? I like having my me time. I can lounge around, take naps, drink excessively, and if I get bored, I can turn on a comedy, like It's a Wonderful Life or The Void.
Seriously? Jay, those are not comedies! And only one of them is a Christmas movie.
Well, I suppose I could turn on some Christmas elves erotica. They're so nimble and so...
No. Shut up. Let's just get to the next character build.
Sheltered Christian.
Today we've got a story of the shame, redemption, and betrayal of a war-torn veteran. But first, if you haven't seen our previous build, The Gentleman, then click the pop-up now to view it. Now let's fall into the eye of the storm that is Halfdan Stormbringer. The Great War had ravaged all of Tamriel, and none suffered in the end quite like the proud, Talos-worshipping Nords of Skyrim. During the war, Halfdan Stormcloak, the illegitimate firstborn son of Hoag Stormcloak, had led many Nords against the Thalmor, and thousands fell by his blade alone. Despite the accomplishments of Halfdan and others, Emperor Titus Mede II submitted to the Thalmor. Their greatest demand was the banning of all Talos worship, and the Emperor carried out their demand. Halfdan, though he had fought valiantly, had become an even greater mockery. All of the Nords had already viewed him as filth because he was the bastard child of Hoag and a black-haired Nord woman, and because he was known for using magic. But with the Emperor's surrender, the people's hatred of Halfdan became greater. Since the Emperor was not easy to get to, those in Skyrim turned their anger against Halfdan, and he felt the greatest shame of his life. He was chased out of Windhelm, beaten, scarred, and dragged by horses to the edge of Skyrim. For the next 26 years, Halfdan wandered the various countries, from Cyrodiil to Hammerfell to Morrowind. It wasn't until news of Ulfric's rebellion that Halfdan decided to return to Skyrim. He sought to join the fight against the Empire, which had brought him so much shame and misery. But as he neared Windhelm, he was caught in a skirmish between his half-brother and the Imperials. He took up a battle axe and wasted no time in cutting down the Imperials. However, he was out of practice and was quickly overpowered. 2 days later, he awoke on a cart with Ulfric, a Stormcloak soldier, and a horse thief. He thought that he would surely die, that this was further punishment for his father's sin. But wanting to feel no further humiliation by being executed as the bastard son of Hoag, Halfdan gave a name he felt fitting, one he would rather die with, Stormbringer. But that did not completely ease his mind. Halfdan began to silently pray to the divines for salvation, and by the grace of Akatosh, he was saved. A great beast with black wings landed and began to burn Helgen to the ground. Having remembered the tales, Halfdan could only conclude that it was Alduin, the World Eater himself. He fled Helgen with the help of Ralof, and thus his quest began to not only restore the worship of Talos, but to defend his homeland from the new dragon menace. And now for the skills. Halfdan quickly began honing his skills in combat, focusing on his skills with a battle axe and heavy armor to protect him in battle. Eventually, Halfdan traveled to Winterhold to re-hone his magical abilities. He quickly mastered his old skill of destruction magic, specifically lightning magic. From there, he began to study both enchanting and conjuration, seeking to better improve his gear in combat and summon allies when needed. As his travels took him from one city to the next, he also became quite well versed in the art of speechcraft. And now for the gear. Early on, Halfdan wears any heavy armor he can get his hands on, especially helmets to hide his identity. The first piece of permanent gear that Halfdan claims is the battle axe known as Wuthrad, which he eventually enhances with his own lightning powers. Later on, Halfdan seeks out orcish camps, as their people were some of the few who were kind to him during his long exile. To show his respect and devotion to these warrior tribes, Halfdan fashions himself a set of orc-plated armor. After having been attacked countless times by strange cultists, Halfdan eventually finds himself in Solstheim, where he soon discovers the mask Zakrisos, a dragon priest who was a master of lightning magics. And now for the gameplay. Halfdan is a true Nord through and through, but unlike many of his people, he does not persecute the other races such as the Dunmer, Argonians, and Orcs. However, he does harbor a deep resentment towards the High Elves and the Imperials, both of which caused him such shame after the Great War. It is because of his hatred for the High Elves that Halfdan chose Wuthrad as his weapon of choice, knowing that this legendary axe would help him in eradicating the vile Thalmor. Halfdan is also a very generous man, always giving away gold to those who are less fortunate than himself, having been at their level for half of his life. He helps everyone he can, but does not help those who he can tell have ill intentions. The only exception to this is Aventus Haratino, as Halfdan sees how Grelod treats the children, and sees no reason in sparing her wicked life. After learning of his dragonborn blood, Halfdan retains his humble attitude. Despite having so much more power than his brother Ulfric, Halfdan continues to acknowledge his little brother's authority as the future High King. He pledges his axe to Ulfric and serves him almost as devoutly as he serves the divines. When it comes to combat, Halfdan always utilizes his two strongest abilities. First is his lightning magic, and second, his brute strength. From a distance, he casts Chain Lightning or Lightning Storm, depending on the strength and number of his enemies. When surrounded by too many opponents, he will use Unbound Storms to eradicate them all. In close combat, Halfdan will summon a lightning cloak around himself, draw Wuthrad from his back, and begin hacking away at his opponents. In addition to his faithful companion, Aella the Huntress, Halfdan will typically have two Storm Thralls by his side, further aiding him in long-distance combat. And now for the powers that Halfdan Stormbringer uses to combat his foes. Ferocious Storm is enacted when Halfdan summons his might and unleashes his Thuum into the heavens, calling down a mighty storm. He then summons a lightning cloak around himself and begins hacking away at his enemies with Wuthrad in his hands. Whirlwind Slash is performed by Halfdan summoning a lightning cloak, slowing time, and charging at his enemies head-on with Wuthrad in hand. The last and most potent of Halfdan's abilities is the Roar of Talos. To perform this, Halfdan will call down a mighty storm, unsheath Wuthrad, and unleash his battle cry. This will send his enemies fleeing, allowing him, Aella, and his Storm Thralls to destroy his foes effortlessly. And now for the timeline. After fleeing Helgen with Ralof, Halfdan headed to Whiterun to inform the Jarl of the dragon attack. Upon nearing the city, he saw a group of warriors fighting off a fierce giant. He jumped in and helped finish the creature off. It is then that a beautiful shield maiden approached him and thanked him for his help. After discussing the companions with her, Halfdan returned to Dragon Reach, all the while thinking about her and the companions. When he finally got to speak with the Jarl about the dragon attack, he left out how he speculated that the dragon was Alduin himself, and soon after, Whiterun came under attack. He headed to the watchtower with Jarl Balgruf's men, and there they defeated a mighty dragon. Upon the beast's death, Halfdan absorbed the dragon's soul, and was shocked to discover the knowledge and inborn ability that he had to shout. He wasted no time in heading to High Hrothgar to see what the Greybeards had in store for him. They taught him another word of power for unrelenting force, as well as a new shout called Whirlwind Sprint. Immediately after this, they sent him to Ustengrav to collect the horn of Jurgen Windcaller. However, the legendary horn was missing, replaced by a letter asking him to meet. Halfdan headed for Riverwood to speak with the mysterious horn thief, only to be confronted by strange cultists. They called him a false dragonborn, and he struggled a bit to dispatch them. He stepped into the Sleeping Giant Inn, and there Delphine not only gave him the horn, but told him that the dragons were being resurrected. Together they traveled to Kynesgrove, where they discovered Alduin resurrecting another dragon. Together they brought down the mighty beast, and Delphine told Halfdan all she knew. The two parted ways, but Halfdan was troubled. Although he had slain 2 dragons and some cultists, he found himself weak. Rather than immediately meeting up with Delphine, Halfdan headed for Whiterun. There he joined the companions and quickly became the strongest and most fearsome of their warriors, even being made a part of the circle within a matter of days. And despite knowing the werewolf blood came from a Daedric prince, Halfdan accepted it. The rush of the transformation, the burning in his blood, the desire to run, it was euphoric. Rather than killing those who attacked him in Whiterun, Halfdan ran out of the city and into the wilderness, feeling the wind against his face and fur. He eventually blacked out and awoke with Aella outside of some fortress. She told him what had happened, and the two of them headed into the fortress to wipe out the silver hand that hid within. There they found Skjor, slain by the Skinner, leader of the Silver Hand. Together, Halfdan and Aella began to wipe out the Silver Hand, but their fury eventually bore ill fruit, when the Silver Hand attacked Jorvaskr and murdered Kodlak Whitemane. After avenging Kodlak and reclaiming the fragments of Wuthrad, the companions burnt Kodlak's remains on the Skyforge. Moments later, Eorland Greymane greeted the circle and gifted the mighty axe of Ysgramor to Halfdan himself. They traveled to Ysgramor's tomb, and there Halfdan freed Kodlak from his lichen blood. After the old Harbinger was freed from Hircing's wolf, he named Halfdan as his successor. Under his leadership, the companions thrived and continued to help those in need throughout all of Skyrim. However, Halfdan could not sit idly in Jorvaskr, and soon traveled to Winterhold, where he began to rediscover the secrets of his lightning magic. Like with the companions, it wasn't long before Halfdan became the Archmage of the college, and had mastered not only his lightning magic, but also summoning and enchanting. He infused Wuthrad with his own power, causing it to electrocute those who would fight against him. After testing his full might against a dragon, not far from Winterhold, Halfdan knew that he was on the right path. But once again, as he traveled the roads, Halfdan was attacked by the strange cultists. With the help of the captain who brought the cultists to Skyrim in the first place, Halfdan made his way to Solstheim. There he uncovered many secrets, from an ancient dragon priest mask which strengthened his lightning magic, to various secrets found only in Apocrypha. Halfdan's power grew to unparalleled levels. However, he was almost outmatched. Having killed dozens of dragons, Miraak was a force unlike any other. With the help of the Daedric Prince of Knowledge, Halfdan was able to cut down the Dragonborn of old. While Miraak's hold on Solstheim was vanquished, Skyrim was still in great turmoil, and Halfdan needed more allies. With his newfound strength, Halfdan made his way to one of the orc strongholds that were scattered along the mountain ranges of Skyrim. Their people had been kind to him, recognizing his battle scars as he was wandering Tamriel for nearly 3 decades. Understandably, the tribes were different from the traveling orcs he had encountered, but in no time Halfdan befriended each and every one of the tribes. Soon after, he returned to Delphine, and their pursuit of the dragon's resurrection continued. They started with the Thalmor, but alas, they lacked the knowledge they sought. But they did have a lead, Esbern. Within a matter of weeks, Halfdan had rebuilt the blades, with allies such as Mjol, Freya, and Argus joining their ranks. With so many allies and with dozens of dragons slain by his hand, Halfdan finally had the courage he needed to confront his brother. He entered into the great city where he once was raised, and saw how lifeless it was. Once a grand city filled with nearly 100 people, Windhelm was not the same as he had left it. Immediately he saw how the Dark Elves were treated, and listened to the words spoken back and forth. Indeed, this city, once his home, had become a shadow of its former self, but Halfdan convinced himself that it was only a result of the war. He marched into the Palace of Kings, and there he stood before his younger brother, his mask removed. Immediately Halfdan could see that Ulfric did not recognize him. He knew him only from Helgen, and treated him no different from any other soldier, but that was just fine. Halfdan pledged his axe to Ulfric, and with him in their ranks, Halfdan knew that their victory would be certain. Countless Imperials in Thalmor fell to Halfdan's axe alone, and eventually the siege of Whiterun began. Halfdan prayed that Balgruuf would join them, but when he refused Ulfric's axe, Halfdan's heart grew heavy. Luckily, Ulfric did not demand the death of Balgruuf, and that little fact eased Halfdan's mind. Within a few weeks, Solitude fell, and Halfdan was glad. His people were finally free of the Thalmor and their imperial puppets. But so long as Alduin and his dragons rained fire upon the land, no one would be safe. Halfdan finally sought answers to defeating Alduin, which led him back to High Hrothgar, where after a short confrontation, he was finally permitted to speak with Parthenax, the leader of the Greybeards. The old grey dragon had much to teach him, and soon he confronted Alduin. The mighty beast was no match, and was quickly defeated, but Alduin would not give up so easily, and fled to Sovngarde, where he sought to devour the souls of the fallen warriors, hoping to enhance his power. This only provided Halfdan with the opportunity to call another dragon to his aid, but alas, sorrowful news quickly followed. Esbern and Delphine demanded that Parthenax be slain, as he was responsible for the deaths of so many innocent men, women, and children. Until he was dead, they refused to continue serving him. Now abandoned by the Blades who he alone rebuilt, Halfdan made his way to Whiterun, and there he trapped the mighty dragon Odahviing. After discussing his plan with the mighty dragon, Halfdan released Odahviing, and the great beast took him to Skuldafn. Now Kryn, a powerful dragon priest, guarded the gateway to Sovngarde, but he was no match for Halfdan Stormbringer. Once in Sovngarde, Halfdan made his way to the Hall of Valor, where ancient warriors from the Merethic era waited for him, eager to bring an end to Alduin once and for all. And so, with the help of the ancient Nord heroes, Halfdan Stormbringer slew the mighty Alduin. Sun gifted Halfdan with a new shout, one that would allow him to call upon the heroes of Sovngarde should their aid ever be needed. When returned to Skyrim, appearing at the throat of the world, Halfdan was greeted by Parthenax, Odahviing, and a dozen or more dragons, as well as Aella. The dragons were freed from Alduin's tyranny, and both Parthenax and Odahviing pledged themselves to Halfdan. After the dragons took flight, soaring across the sky, Halfdan and Aella found themselves alone. After countless battles against the Silver Hand, dragons, Miraak, and now Alduin, both were weary and desired peace. It was at that moment that they professed their love for one another, and the very next day they were married. Together they built a home in Falkreath, overlooking the lake, and for the first time in what seemed like eternity, they were at peace.
I do, now and forever.
Do you agree to be bound together in love, now and forever?
Ulfric was the High King, and reigned from his throne in Windhelm, the jagged crown upon his head. But the Thalmor and the Empire would not allow this to continue. Only 6 years after Ulfric's ascension, Titus Mede II prepared to launch an attack on Skyrim. Once again, Halfdan picked up his axe and traveled to Windhelm to pledge himself to Ulfric. But as he prepared to, Ralof spoke up. He said that they should follow Halfdan into battle, that since he is the Dragonborn, he is the rightful heir to the dragon throne of Cyrodiil. But these words only caused Ulfric's pride and rage to burst. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "I will not serve my father's bastard son." Halfdan's eyes grew wide. "You've known this entire time, haven't you?" Ulfric glared down from his throne. "Of course I've known," he scoffed. Ulfric revealed that the only reason he allowed him to join is because he heard rumors that Halfdan was the Dragonborn. Despite wanting to be High King of Skyrim, Ulfric refused to serve under him. When Ralof had first uttered those words, Halfdan wanted nothing to do with being the Emperor. But upon hearing Ulfric's confession, he wanted nothing more. Not only to put Ulfric in line, but to bring peace to all of Tamriel. Halfdan raised his axe and exclaimed that by his birthright he is to be the Emperor, and once crowned, he will bring peace to the Empire. He approached Ulfric, his axe still in hand, and he offered it to him. Ulfric glared and spit upon Halfdan's axe. The throne room was silent, and Halfdan began to walk towards the door. As he reached for the handle, Halfdan heard the thunderous noise, but the shout had no effect on Halfdan. He turned to face Ulfric, who was stunned that his shout had no effect on him, and backed closer to his throne. Halfdan did nothing but stare at Ulfric, his axe sheathed, his lips closed, no hint of malice in his gaze, and this stature drew all of Ulfric's soldiers. Baffled and enraged that his own people sided with Halfdan, Ulfric prepared to shout again, but Halfdan would not allow his brother to put these men and women in harm's way. Halfdan unleashed his Thu'um and sent Ulfric back into his throne, knocking the jagged crown from his head. Ulfric tried to sit up, but again Halfdan unleashed his Thu'um. All, even Galmar, stood idly by, having seen the true heart of Ulfric that moment. Halfdan walked closer to Ulfric, and each time Ulfric tried to shout, Halfdan shouted first, until he was right in front of Ulfric. Once more, Halfdan held out his axe in friendship, and again Ulfric spat on it. Halfdan bowed his head and sheathed his axe. He called Galmar and told him to gag Ulfric and lock him in the dungeon. Galmar obeyed, but as he neared Ulfric, he prepared to shout at Galmar. Seeing this, Halfdan unleashed his Thu'um one last time, and shouted Ulfric to dust. All gasped and murmured, but Halfdan did not stand victoriously. He stood in shame, his head bowed and his eyes closed. He expected to be chased out of Windhelm again, that they would not accept him after seeing him shout his own brother, his High King, to pieces. But to his surprise, he heard Galmar's voice from behind him saying, "My lord." When he turned to look, there was Galmar, kneeling and holding the jagged crown, and behind him were dozens of other Stormcloaks, all kneeling. Halfdan took the crown and placed it upon his head, and immediately he exited the Palace of Kings. He commanded Odahviing to summon more dragons, to tell them to meet at the throat of the world. With Aella, the Stormcloaks, the Companions, and the Orcs whom he had befriended, Halfdan waited at the throat of the world. While they waited, Paarthurnax taught Halfdan more about the Way of the Voice, and how to better enhance his Thu'um. Eventually the roars of dragons echoed, and all looked to see Odahviing return with hundreds of dragons. Halfdan got on the back of Paarthurnax, who flew him above the mighty peak, and in his strong voice, Halfdan commanded all his allies and the dragons. He spoke of his deeds 6 years ago, how he defeated Miraak, strengthened the Companions, traveled to Sovngarde to destroy Alduin, and how it was he who helped secure Ulfric's position as High King. He commanded the dragons to allow his men to ride upon their backs. The dragons were hesitant, but Paarthurnax and Odahviing spoke their minds, telling the others that if Halfdan's Thu'um could overpower Alduin, their former overlord, then they should not resist his will. The dragons roared in agreement, and quickly all of the soldiers mounted up. But there was one final stop to be made: Skyhaven Temple. Unsurprisingly, the Blades were armed and ready to fight when they saw the massive horde of dragons approach. But as Parthenax landed, they were shocked to see Halfdan, the Dragonborn, step down from the mighty dragon's back. He spoke to Delphine and Esbern, and told them that with Alduin gone, the dragon submitted to his Thu'um. No longer would they burn the skies and scorch the earth. No longer would they kill the innocent. But Delphine wouldn't listen. She screamed at Halfdan, calling him a traitor, and Esbern stood back in silence. Halfdan repeated Parthenax's words of old. What is better, to be born good, or to overcome your evil nature through great effort? While Delphine scoffed at the words, Esbern took them to heart and stepped forward. He reminded the others that their first duty is to the Dragonborn, not to the slaying of dragons. Delphine's eyes were wide in disbelief as her old friend uttered those words. The Blades, which now consisted of 50 members, all stepped forward, repledging themselves to Halfdan and his will. All, except for Delphine, who took off her armor and threw down her sword. As she prepared to head back to Riverwood, Halfdan and his army of dragon riders took to the skies. One group, consisting of 5 dragons, headed towards Solitude, where a dozen Imperial ships had begun to arrive. They spoke to the ships and ordered them to turn back and anchor in the center of the sea. Only one ship refused, and they began to fire their arrows at the dragons and their riders. But the ship and the soldiers were frozen by the dragon's Thu'um, left an iceberg floating on the Sea of Solitude. In other parts around Skyrim, the mighty dragons stopped marching soldiers, mounted officers, and battle mages. They told them that the Dragonborn was the rightful emperor, and that he would soon sit upon the dragon throne. And most of the Imperial troops ceased their march on Skyrim, but some refused and were frozen by the dragon's mighty Thu'um. Halfdan and the majority of his armies arrived in Cyrodiil, and all the dragons who had gone ahead of him proclaimed that the true emperor, the Dragonborn, was coming. Do not fight, for the last thing the Dragonborn wants is the death of his people. While not everyone desired to surrender, they were frozen in fear at the sight of the dragon-riding army. Titus Mede himself nearly fainted at the sight. The dragons landed and the soldiers dismounted, forming groups of 20s and 50s to patrol the streets. The dragons took high vantage points or flew around the city, keeping watch of the soldiers below. As for the Blades, all 50 of them marched with Halfdan into the White Gold Tower, where Titus Mede II, along with his court and the Thalmor ambassadors, waited. The Thalmor and his mages were prepared to fight, and the Elder Council and the Emperor's court stood with fear in their hearts for what would happen next. Then Halfdan approached, his stature mighty as he handed his axe to Esbern. He approached the dragon throne, where Titus Mede II sat, and there he proclaimed, "I am Halfdan Stormbringer, last Dragonborn of legend, slayer of Alduin, High King of Skyrim, and protector of her people. By my very birthright, by the ancient law of Akatosh, I am to be crowned emperor." The hall was silent, and all attention turned towards Titus Mede, who stood up and walked down to meet Halfdan. He was face to face with the mighty Dragonborn, and the suspension grew, until finally Titus Mede II fell to his knees and said, "Great are you, Halfdan Stormbringer, my emperor." The Thalmor ambassador's eyes burned with fire, and lightning began to spark between his fingertips. "Rise, Titus," Halfdan said, as he reached his hand out towards the timid man. There was no ceremony, despite the Elder Council insisting on one. Halfdan simply sat upon the dragon throne, and immediately the dragon fires ignited. The Thalmor ambassador stepped forward, saying, "Live long, Emperor Halfdan. As the head Thalmor ambassador, I am sure you'll continue to adhere to the White Gold Concordact." Halfdan stared at the High Elf for a moment, then called for the contract which had been written. Immediately it was brought before him, and he read it. "Unfortunately, Ambassador," he began, "this is not my signature." He held the paper to his lips and whispered, "Yol," and the contract was burnt to ash. Enraged, the arrogant Thalmor cast lightning bolts at him, but the spell had no effect on Halfdan. The blades took hold of the ambassador and his Thalmor, bringing them to their knees as Halfdan approached. Esbern gave Wuthred back to the Emperor, and as he took hold, it began to spark with lightning. "Do you know why I am called the Stormbringer?" The ambassador muttered under his breath. "No." Halfdan held the axe to the ambassador's throat. "Because I am the storm." With one mighty swing, he removed the hands of all the Thalmor, including the ambassador. With a powerful shock from his fingertips, he cauterized their wounds. The ambassador and his lackeys were then taken to Somerset as a warning to the remaining Thalmor. But the High Elves were arrogant, and quickly they assembled their own army. However, that was their biggest mistake. Emperor Halfdan wasted no time, and as soon as the Thalmor army was assembled, his legion of dragons burnt them to ash. Not a single Thalmor was left alive, and their great temple was turned to rubble. From that day forward, the worship of Talos was once again permitted. Dragons and blades flew together, protecting Tamriel from all manner of foes, including the Saesi, who eventually attempted to invade and conquer Tamriel. Jarl Balgruuf was made the High King of Skyrim, with Whiterun as his new capital. The Dark Brotherhood were quickly discovered and wiped out, with Cicero and the Night Mother's body being burnt to ash by Parthenax himself. Eventually, the Volkihar clan revealed themselves publicly, and with the aid of Serana and the Dawnguard, they were destroyed, and the bow of Ariel gifted to Halfdan as a sign of good faith that Serana would not turn against him. As for Titus Mede II, he was made first advisor to the Emperor, as Halfdan knew the old man was filled with much wisdom, and would help in the years to come. As Halfdan neared his 100th winter, he called upon Farkas and Vilkas, and together they accompanied him and Aella to the tomb of Ysgramor. There, with the heads of the Glenmoral witches, Vilkas, Farkas, and Aella were cured of their lycanthropy. But there was no witch head left for Halfdan. He did not regret allowing his two shield brothers to be cured rather than him, but he feared for his sons and daughters, whom he and Aella had conceived with their wolf blood. In Halfdan's 120th winter, he neared death. He called his sons and his daughters to the throne room, and there he told them of a shout that he had been working on with Parthenax, one that could tear out the curse of Hircine. First he used it on them, and sure enough, the spirit of the wolf was torn from each of them, and the blade slew it. One after another he shouted, until all 12 of his children had been freed from Hircine's curse. Then finally, it was his turn. They had heard the shout, and Halfdan taught his children the meaning. And together all 12 of his children used the shout on him, and a fierce wolf spirit emerged from him. They, along with the blades, slew the mighty wolf that had been latched to their father's spirit. With a smile on his face, Halfdan blessed his eldest son and heir, Bjorn Fireheart, and took his final breath. All of Tamriel mourned the loss of their great and kind emperor, and on the night his body was burned on the Skyforge, a voice echoed from the heavens throughout all of Tamriel. "I am Akatosh, chief of the divines. On this night I take Halfdan Stormbringer and appoint him as god of thunder and peace." And in the night sky, for all to see, a new constellation appeared, one of a mighty dragon surrounded by lightning. And so it has been, from the first day to the 7th night of Rain's Hand. All of the Empire, including the great dragons themselves, celebrate the life and death of Halfdan Stormbringer, making great offerings to him and dancing in the storm that he sends on the last of the 7 nights. So, Jay, I noticed you texting with Harley while I was recording. Did you change your mind? Are you gonna go spend Christmas with her?
Well, if it means that much to her, I guess I'll go.
You're not fooling anyone, Jay. I see you blushing over there. You're excited to see her.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Just finish the video. Ooh, I got a voice message.
We hope you enjoyed our latest build, Halfdan Stormbringer. If you did, then please hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and click the bell icon to be notified of our future videos. Have a great rest of your week, everyone, and we'll see you all here next time on the Morbid Veil.